the moment my daughter-in-law Lisa screamed, "You're nothing but dead weight." At our family dinner table, I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, she'd be on her knees begging me to sign a piece of paper that would change everything. But let me back up and tell you how I, Grace Mitchell, a 67-year-old retired elementary school teacher, went from feeling like the most unwanted person in the world to discovering that sometimes life has the most incredible plot twists waiting just around the corner. My name is Grace, and for the past 2 years, I've been living in what I thought was my safe haven, my son David's house here in suburban Detroit, Michigan. After my husband Tom passed away from cancer, I sold everything I owned to help my son and his family keep their home. I moved into their spare bedroom, thinking I was joining a loving family unit where I could help raise my twin grandsons and contribute to the household while grieving my tremendous loss. David is my only child, my pride and joy, a hard-working plumber who inherited his father's strong hands and gentle heart. At 38, he's been married to Lisa for 12 years, and together they have 9-year-old twin boys, Jake and Sam. When I first moved in, I thought I was getting a second chance at family life, helping with homework, cooking family dinners, and watching the boys after school while their parents worked. Lisa seemed welcoming at first. She's 35, works part-time as a dental hygienist, and has always been what I'd call particular about how things should be done. She likes her house spotless, her schedules rigid, and her life organized down to the smallest detail. When Tom was sick, she'd bring casseroles and offer to help with anything we needed. She'd hug me at family gatherings and call me Mom, just like a real daughter should. But something changed after I moved in permanently. Maybe it was the stress of having another adult in the house, or maybe it was financial pressure. But Lisa started treating me differently. The warm hugs became stiff, obligatory embraces. The conversations became clipped and formal, and slowly I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells in what was supposed to be my new home. The boys, Jake and Sam, became my saving grace during those difficult months. Jake is the quieter twin, a thoughtful boy who loves reading adventure books and building elaborate Lego creations. He reminds me so much of David at that age, always thinking before he speaks and approaching problems with careful consideration. Sam is his opposite, energetic, outgoing, and full of questions about everything from why the sky is blue to how airplanes stay up in the air. They both have Tom's infectious laugh and David's kind eyes, and they light up whenever they see me. Every day after school, they'd run to me with their backpacks full of artwork and stories about their day. I'd help them with homework at the kitchen table, the same way I'd helped hundreds of students during my 35 years of teaching. We'd work on math problems together, practice spelling words, and read stories that transported us to magical worlds far away from any family tension. In the evenings, I'd tuck them into their bunk beds and tell them stories about their grandfather Tom, how he taught David to fix engines, how he could make anyone laugh with his terrible dad jokes, and how much he would have loved watching them grow up. Those moments felt precious and pure, untouched by the growing coldness I felt from Lisa during the day. I contributed my monthly teacher's pension of $1,800 to the household expenses, which David assured me was more than fair for room and board. I also provided free childcare, saving them hundreds of dollars they would have spent on after-school programs. I cooked dinner most nights, did my own laundry, and tried to stay out of Lisa's way as much as possible. But despite my contributions, I increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest rather than a family member. Lisa would rearrange my things in the bathroom without asking, move my groceries to different shelves, and make comments about people who don't know when they've worn out their welcome. She'd whisper on phone calls and stop talking when I entered rooms, creating an atmosphere of secrecy that made me constantly anxious. David, bless his heart, worked long hours and often had emergency plumbing calls that kept him away from home until late at night. When he was home, he was usually exhausted and just wanted to relax with a beer and watch television. He didn't see the subtle ways Lisa made me feel unwanted, or maybe he was too tired to deal with family drama. I never wanted to put him in the middle of anything, so I kept most of my hurt feelings to myself. I had started secretly browsing senior living communities online, but the reality was stark and depressing. Even the most basic assisted living facilities cost more than my entire monthly pension, and the nicer places required substantial down payments that I simply didn't have. After selling my townhouse to help David avoid foreclosure, I had used most of my savings to pay off Tom's medical bills and funeral expenses. I was financially trapped, dependent on my son's charity, and growing more miserable by the day. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. I had left behind my neighborhood friends, my church community, and my familiar routines when I moved in with David's family. Here, I felt like I was living in someone else's life, always trying to be helpful without being intrusive, grateful without being needy, present without being burdensome. Some nights, lying in the narrow bed in their spare room surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations and outgrown children's clothes, I wondered if Tom would be disappointed in how my life had turned out. We had planned to travel during retirement, to visit our grandchildren regularly, but maintain our independence, to age gracefully in our own space. Instead, I felt like I was slowly disappearing, becoming smaller and quieter each day to avoid conflict. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come, and that Lisa's growing hostility toward me wasn't just about personality clashes or household stress. There was something much bigger happening behind the scenes, something that would explain her sudden change in behavior and lead to the most shocking revelation of my entire life. But first, I had to survive the dinner that would change everything, the night when Lisa's true feelings about me would explode into the open, shattering any remaining illusions I had about being welcomed in their home. The night when I would finally understand that I wasn't just unwanted, I was standing in the way of something Lisa desperately wanted, something she was willing to destroy our family to get. That Sunday dinner was supposed to be a celebration of Sam's good report card, a simple family meal where we could all come together and be proud of his hard work in school. Instead, it became the night that revealed just how far some people will go when they think money is within their grasp, and how cruel they can become when they see someone else as an obstacle to their dreams of wealth. What I didn't know was that while I was feeling more unwanted and invisible each day, Lisa had been discovering information that would make her see me in a completely different light, not as a burden to be tolerated, but as the key to a fortune she felt she deserved. And tomorrow, everything would come crashing down in the most unexpected way possible. To really understand how I ended up in this impossible situation, I need to take you back to where it all began, the day my world fell apart, and I thought my son David was my saving grace. It was October 15th, 2 years ago, when Tom took his last breath in our bedroom while I held his hand. After 42 years of marriage, I suddenly found myself completely alone for the first time in my adult life. Tom had been my high school sweetheart, the boy who walked me home from the library every day during our senior year. We married right after graduation, and he worked construction while I put myself through college to become a teacher. He was my rock, my best friend, and the father who taught David everything about being a good man. When the doctors told us his lung cancer had spread and he had maybe 6 months to live, Tom made me promise I wouldn't spend my final years alone and struggling. "Gracie," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to call me, "when I'm gone, you go live with David and help him raise those boys. You've got so much love left to give, and they need their grandmother. Don't you dare try to be some stubborn, independent woman when you've got family who cares about you." At the time, it seemed like the perfect solution. David had been struggling financially ever since he started his plumbing business 5 years earlier. The 2020 pandemic had hit small businesses hard, and he'd fallen behind on his mortgage payments, trying to keep his employees paid. Lisa had mentioned several times how expensive childcare was, and how nice it would be to have family help with the boys after school. Our 3-bedroom townhouse sold quickly. The real estate market was booming, and we got almost $300,000 for a place Tom and I had bought for $80,000 back in 1995. After paying off our small remaining mortgage and Tom's medical bills, I had about $220,000 left. When David tearfully told me he was 3 months behind on his mortgage and facing foreclosure, I didn't hesitate to write a check for $50,000 to bring his payments current and give him some breathing room. "Mom, I can't take your money," David had said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You need that for your retirement, for your future." "Honey," I told him, "my future is making sure you and your family are secure. Grandpa Tom would want me to help, and I want to help. We're family, and family takes care of each other." The remaining money went into a conservative investment account that generated about $900 a month in interest, which combined with my teacher's pension of $1,800, gave me enough to contribute to household expenses and still have a little left over for personal needs. Lisa seemed genuinely happy about the arrangement initially. She hugged me at Tom's funeral and whispered, "Mom, Grace, you're not losing a husband. You're gaining a whole family who loves you. We're going to take such good care of you." Those first few months were actually wonderful. I moved into their guest bedroom, which Lisa had decorated with some of my favorite furniture pieces from the townhouse. She made space in the closet for my clothes and cleared out 2 dresser drawers for my personal items. The room had a large window facing their backyard where I could watch the boys play on their swing set and see Lisa's flower garden blooming in the spring. David's house is a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and sidewalks where children ride their bikes safely. It was built in 1987 with an updated kitchen, hardwood floors throughout the main level, and a finished basement where the boys keep their toys and video games. The mortgage payment was $2,800 a month, which had seemed manageable when David's business was thriving, but became overwhelming when work slowed down. My daily routine quickly fell into a comfortable pattern. I'd wake up at 6:30 and start coffee before anyone else was awake. By 7, I'd have breakfast ready, usually scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit for the boys, coffee and whatever Lisa wanted for herself. David typically left for work by 7:15, grabbing coffee and a piece of toast as he headed out the door with his toolbox and work van. The boys caught the school bus at 8:20, and Lisa usually left for her part-time job at Dr. Peterson's dental office around 9. This gave me the entire day to myself, which I filled with grocery shopping, light housekeeping, and preparing dinner. I'd learned that Lisa preferred I not rearrange anything in her kitchen, so I was careful to put everything back exactly where I found it. Lisa worked 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, earning about $1,200 a month. It wasn't much, but combined with David's income, which varied between $4,000 and $6,000 monthly depending on how many jobs he could book, They were managing to stay afloat with my contribution to expenses. The afternoons were my favorite time of day. Jake and Sam would burst through the front door at 3:45, full of energy and stories about their school day. I'd have snacks waiting, apple slices with peanut butter, graham crackers with milk, or sometimes homemade cookies if I'd had time to bake. We'd sit at the kitchen table while they told me about their teachers, their friends, and whatever new things they'd learned. Jake was struggling a bit with reading comprehension, so we'd spend extra time going through his homework together. I'd use the same techniques I'd developed during my teaching career, breaking down difficult words into smaller parts, asking questions about the story to help him think critically, and celebrating every small improvement. Sam was naturally gifted in math but had trouble sitting still long enough to complete his assignments, so I'd let him take breaks to run around the backyard between problems. Both boys were on a local soccer team, and I loved attending their Saturday morning games. I'd pack orange slices and water bottles, cheer from the sidelines, and take pictures to send to my sister Nancy in Florida. Watching them run around the field, their faces flushed with excitement and determination, reminded me so much of David at that age. Tom would have been so proud to see his grandsons growing into such good boys. Evenings were family time, at least in theory. I'd have dinner ready by 6, nothing fancy, just wholesome comfort food like meatloaf with mashed potatoes, chicken and rice casserole, or spaghetti with homemade sauce. We'd all sit around the dining room table, and I'd ask the boys about their day, help them with any remaining homework, and listen to David talk about whatever plumbing disasters he'd fixed. But it was during these family dinners that I first started noticing the subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. She'd make little comments about the grocery budget, suggesting I was buying too many extras, like the name-brand cereal the boys preferred. She'd mention how crowded the house felt with so many people living there, even though it was just one additional person. When the boys would ask me questions or tell me about school, she'd interrupt to redirect their attention to her instead. "Sam, tell Mommy about your science project," she'd say, cutting off his excited explanation of something he'd discovered during our afternoon homework time. "Jake, did you remember to put your soccer uniform in the hamper like Mommy asked?" she'd interject when he was showing me a drawing he'd made in art class. I tried to brush off these small moments, telling myself that Lisa was just asserting her role as the boy's mother, and that I needed to be more careful about overstepping boundaries. But as the months passed, the tension became harder to ignore. Lisa started making changes to the house routines without discussing them with me. She'd rearrange the pantry and get irritated when I couldn't find ingredients for dinner. She'd move my favorite coffee mug to a high shelf I couldn't reach without asking for help. She'd schedule the boys for activities during times when I usually helped them with homework, then complain that they were falling behind in school. Most concerning of all, she began having whispered phone conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. She'd take calls in the basement or step outside to the backyard, speaking in hushed tones that suggested secrecy. When I'd ask David about it, he'd just shrug and say Lisa was probably talking to her sister or planning some surprise for the boys. David himself seemed increasingly stressed and distant. His plumbing business was doing better financially, but he was working longer hours and taking on more challenging jobs to build his reputation. He'd come home exhausted, eat dinner quickly, help the boys with their bedtime routine, and then collapse in front of the television until he fell asleep in his recliner. On weekends, he'd catch up on paperwork, maintain his work van, and handle honey-do projects around the house that Lisa had been requesting. There was very little time for family bonding or meaningful conversations, and I could see the stress wearing on him. His hair was turning gray at the temples. He'd gained weight from eating fast food during work days, and he seemed to have lost the easy laugh that had always been one of his most endearing qualities. I started to wonder if my presence in the house was adding to everyone's stress, rather than helping. Maybe Lisa felt like she couldn't relax in her own home with her mother-in-law constantly around. Maybe David felt obligated to include me in family decisions and activities when he'd rather just focus on his wife and children. Maybe the boys were confused about authority figures and house rules, with 3 adults giving them guidance. These doubts kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling in my small bedroom and wondering if Tom had been wrong about what would be best for me. I missed my independence, my own space, my freedom to make decisions about my daily routine without worrying about disrupting someone else's household. But I also couldn't see any viable alternatives, and I was afraid to bring up my concerns with David because I didn't want to seem ungrateful or demanding. The truth was, I was trapped by my own good intentions, and by financial circumstances I couldn't control. I had given up my independent life to help my family, and now I was completely dependent on their continued willingness to house and tolerate me. It was a vulnerable position that left me feeling powerless and increasingly unwelcome, even though everyone was still being polite on the surface. What I didn't know was that my feelings of unease were completely justified, and that Lisa's growing hostility toward me had nothing to do with normal family adjustment issues. She had discovered something that changed everything about how she viewed my presence in their home, and she was making plans that would soon bring our simmering conflict to a devastating boiling point. The Sunday that changed everything started out like any other family dinner. I had spent the afternoon preparing Sam's favorite meal, honey-glazed ham with roasted sweet potatoes and green bean casserole, to celebrate his excellent report card. He had finally brought his reading grade up from a C to a B+, and I was so proud of the hard work we'd done together every afternoon at the kitchen table. I set the dining room table with Lisa's good china, the white plates with delicate blue flowers that she usually reserved for holidays. I even picked fresh flowers from her garden to make a centerpiece, hoping to create a special atmosphere for our celebration. The boys were excited, chattering about Sam's improvement and making plans for how they wanted to spend the $20 David had promised him for better grades. David came home from work around 5:30, unusually tired from a difficult job, replacing a broken sewer line in someone's basement. He kissed the boys hello, gave me a quick hug, and headed upstairs to shower and change clothes. Lisa had been quiet all afternoon, which I attributed to her having worked a long shift at the dental office on Friday. She'd been increasingly moody on weekends lately, but I tried to stay positive and focus on making dinner special for Sam. As we gathered around the table, I could feel an odd tension in the air, but I pushed the feeling aside and started serving everyone their plates. The boys were animated, telling their father about their week at school and showing off the gold star sticker Sam had earned for improved reading. David smiled and praised them both, but I noticed he seemed distracted, checking his phone several times during the conversation. "Sam, I'm so proud of how hard you've been working on your reading," I said, passing him the sweet potatoes. "Remember when we started with those easy chapter books, and now you're reading stories that are twice as long." "Grandma Grace helped me every day," Sam said proudly. "She does the voices for all the different characters, and she asks me questions that help me understand what's happening in the story." That's when I noticed Lisa's fork pause halfway to her mouth and her jaw tighten in a way that I'd started to recognize as a warning sign. But I was feeling so happy about Sam's success that I decided to share another observation. "You know, I've been thinking that Jake might benefit from some extra help with math," I said gently, cutting my ham into small pieces. He's been struggling with word problems, and I remember when I was teaching, there were some great tutoring programs that really made a difference for kids who just needed a little extra support. The silence that followed my suggestion was immediate and deafening. David stopped chewing and looked up from his plate. Lisa set down her fork with more force than necessary, and the boys sensed the sudden shift in mood, their excited chatter dying away. "A tutor," Lisa repeated slowly, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "You think Jake needs a tutor?" "Well, not necessarily a professional tutor." I backtracked quickly, realizing I'd somehow said the wrong thing. I just meant maybe some additional practice at home, or those workbooks they sell at the bookstore. I used to recommend them to parents when you were a teacher," Lisa cut me off, her voice rising. "Yes, Grace, we know. You remind us constantly about your teaching experience, about how much you know about children, about all the ways we should be raising our kids differently." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. "Lisa, I didn't mean to imply that you weren't doing a good job. I was just trying to help." "Help?" Lisa's voice cracked like a whip. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I sit, all you do is criticize and interfere and act like you know better than the actual parents in this house." David reached across the table toward his wife. "Lisa, honey, let's just calm down and—" "No, David," Lisa slammed her hand on the table, making the water glasses jump and causing Jake to flinch in his chair. "I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own house because your mother thinks she knows how to run our lives better than we do." The boys were staring with wide, frightened eyes, and I felt my heart breaking for them. This was supposed to be Sam's celebration dinner, and instead, they were witnessing their mother have what appeared to be a complete emotional breakdown. "Lisa, please," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "Let's not do this in front of the children. If I've done something to upset you, we can talk about it privately after dinner." "Privately?" Lisa laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "That's rich, coming from someone who has no concept of privacy or boundaries. You want to know what upsets me, Grace? Everything about this situation upsets me." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with an awful screeching sound. The boys both jumped, and Sam looked like he was about to cry. I wanted to reach out and comfort them, but I was frozen in shock at Lisa's sudden explosion of anger. "Maybe if you weren't such a burden draining our resources, we could afford a tutor," Lisa shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "Maybe if we didn't have dead weight living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities, and taking up space, we could actually provide for our children the way they deserve." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Lisa, I contribute to the household expenses. I pay for groceries and utilities, and I help with the boys every day. I don't understand why you're saying these things." "You contribute?" Lisa's voice went up an octave. "You contribute nothing but problems and complications. You think because you hand over your little pension check every month that makes you valuable? You think because you help with homework that makes you indispensable?" David finally found his voice, but instead of defending me, his words cut just as deep as Lisa's had. "Mom, maybe Celeste has a point here. We're all stressed about money, and this living arrangement, it's not working for anyone." I turned to look at my son in complete shock. David, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep when he had nightmares, the teenager I'd driven to soccer practice and helped with college applications, the man I'd given my life savings to help save his home, was sitting there agreeing with his wife's cruel assessment of my worth. "David," I whispered, feeling tears start to blur my vision. I thought I thought I was helping. I thought you wanted me here." "We did want you here," he said, not meeting my eyes. "At first. But Mom, you have to understand, we're barely keeping our heads above water financially. Having another person in the house, even someone who contributes, it's a lot of pressure." Lisa wasn't finished with her attack. She leaned forward, her hands planted on the table, her face flushed with anger that seemed to have been building for months. "You want to know the truth, Grace. You contribute nothing but take everything. You act like you own this place, like you belong here, like we should be grateful for your presence. But the reality is that you're nothing but dead weight that we're carrying out of obligation." "That's enough," I finally found my voice, standing up to face my daughter-in-law. "I have never acted like I own this house. I have tried every single day to be helpful and respectful and to stay out of your way. I've given you my money, my time, and my love, and I don't deserve to be spoken to like this." "Love?" Lisa laughed bitterly. "You call it love when you undermine my parenting decisions? You call it love when you insert yourself into every family conversation? You call it love when you make my children more attached to their grandmother than their own mother?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I had never, ever tried to compete with Lisa for the boys' affection. I loved being their grandmother, but I had always been careful to reinforce her authority as their mother. "Lisa, that's not fair, and you know it," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I have never tried to undermine you as a parent. I love those boys, but I would never try to replace you in their lives." "Wouldn't you?" she shot back. "Then why do they run to you when they get home from school? Why do they ask you for help with homework instead of waiting for me? Why do they tell you things they don't tell me?" I could see the pain and insecurity behind her anger now. But it was mixed with something else, something that looked almost like desperation. This wasn't just about household tensions or parenting disagreements. This felt bigger, more serious, like there were underlying issues I didn't understand. "Mom," David said quietly, still not looking directly at me, "maybe it would be better for everyone if you found your own place. We can help you look for senior housing, something affordable where you'd have your independence back." The betrayal was complete. My own son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was essentially asking me to leave. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet, like everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it was an illusion. "You want me to leave," I said, not really a question but a statement of the horrible reality that was becoming clear. "We think it would be better for everyone," Lisa said, her voice now coldly controlled. "You need to find somewhere else to live. We can't carry dead weight anymore, and we can't keep pretending this arrangement works when it clearly doesn't." Jake started crying then, big tears rolling down his cheeks as he looked back and forth between his mother and me. Sam reached over and took his brother's hand, both boys looking terrified and confused by the adult drama exploding around them. "Please don't fight," Jake whispered. "Please don't make Grandma Grace go away." "Boys, go to your room," Lisa commanded sharply. "This is grown-up business, and you don't need to hear any more of this conversation." They reluctantly left the table, Jake still sniffling and Sam shooting worried looks back at me as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom. I watched them go, my heart breaking for the trauma they'd just witnessed and for the possibility that I might not be part of their daily lives much longer. The dining room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the sound of my own rapid heartbeat in my ears. I looked around at the table I'd set so carefully with the good china, at the flowers I'd picked from Lisa's garden, at the celebration dinner that had turned into the worst moment of my life since Tom's death. "I'll start looking for apartments tomorrow," I said quietly, my dignity the only thing I had left to hold on to. I never meant to be a burden to anyone, and I certainly never meant to cause problems in your marriage or with the boys. I turned to leave the dining room, but Lisa's voice stopped me at the doorway. "And Grace? We'll need to discuss the financial arrangements once you move out. There are things that need to be adjusted." Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine, but I was too emotionally devastated to process what she might mean. I just nodded and walked upstairs to my room, closing the door behind me and finally allowing myself to break down completely. Sitting on the edge of my narrow bed, surrounded by the belongings I'd brought from the home Tom and I had shared, I felt more alone and unwanted than I had since the day he died. I had given up my independence, my savings, and my dignity to help my family, and in return, I was being told I was worthless dead weight that needed to be discarded. But what I didn't know was that Lisa's cruelty wasn't random or even purely emotional. That night, as I lay awake planning my uncertain future, I would overhear a phone conversation that would reveal the real reason behind her sudden determination to get rid of me, and it had nothing to do with household stress or parenting disagreements, and everything to do with money, more money than I could have ever imagined. The next 24 hours would turn my world completely upside down and show me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the same ones who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their own greedy ambitions. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every horrible word from dinner over and over in my mind. The house had fallen silent hours ago, but I couldn't stop the racing thoughts that kept me wide awake. How had I misread the situation so completely? How had I gone from feeling like a helpful family member to being called dead weight in the span of one conversation? Around midnight, I finally gave up on sleep and quietly made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the small light above the stove that Lisa always left on, and I moved carefully to avoid waking anyone. As I stood at the sink, looking out at the backyard where the boys' swing set cast long shadows in the moonlight, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to leave, and I was going to do it with whatever dignity I had left. I wouldn't beg David to reconsider or try to convince Lisa that I could be a better houseguest. I wouldn't grovel or make excuses or promise to change my behavior to accommodate their wishes. I had spent 2 years walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect mother-in-law and grandmother, and it hadn't been enough. Nothing I could do would ever be enough for Lisa, and clearly David was too weak or too tired to stand up for what was right. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and began searching for senior living communities within 50 miles of Detroit. The websites all looked cheerful and welcoming, with photos of smiling elderly people playing cards, tending gardens, and participating in group activities. But the prices made my heart sink. Even the most basic studio apartments in assisted living facilities started at $2,800 a month, more than my entire pension. I had about $40,000 left in my investment account from the sale of our townhouse, which could cover maybe 18 months of rent if I found the cheapest possible place. But then what? I'd be indigent, dependent on government assistance, and completely alone. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. I also looked into regular apartment rentals, but even modest one-bedroom places in safe neighborhoods were running $1,500 to $1,800 a month, plus utilities, plus the requirement for first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. I had the money for the initial costs, but I'd be spending nearly my entire monthly income on housing, leaving almost nothing for food, medicine, or transportation. The financial reality was stark and depressing, but I refused to let it change my decision. I would rather struggle alone than continue to live somewhere I wasn't wanted. Tom had always said that dignity was something no one could take away from you unless you let them. And I wasn't going to let Lisa's cruelty strip me of my self-respect. As dawn began to filter through my bedroom window, I made a mental list of people I could reach out to for advice or support. My sister Nancy lived in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida, and she'd been encouraging me to consider moving south where the cost of living was lower. My old teaching colleague Helen had mentioned that her mother had found a nice senior community in Ohio where the waiting list wasn't too long. I decided to start by calling Nancy after breakfast. She was an early riser and I knew she'd be awake by 7 o'clock. Nancy was 3 years older than me and had been widowed for 5 years when her husband Carl died in a car accident. She had navigated the transition to senior living with grace and independence, and I trusted her advice more than anyone else's. At 6:30, I heard David's alarm clock go off, followed by the sound of the shower running. I waited until I heard his work van pull out of the driveway before venturing downstairs to make coffee. I wanted to avoid any awkward conversations until I had a concrete plan in place. Lisa didn't emerge from her bedroom until almost 9, and when she did, she acted as if nothing had happened the night before. She made herself toast and coffee, checked her phone for messages, and got ready for work, without acknowledging my presence beyond a cool "good morning." When she passed through the kitchen, the boys had been unusually quiet at breakfast, picking at their cereal and casting worried glances in my direction. Before they left for school, Jake hugged me extra tight and whispered, "I don't want you to go away, Grandma Grace." "We'll see what happens, sweetheart," I told him, fighting back tears. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, but that doesn't change how much I love you and Sam." After everyone left for the day, I called Nancy from the kitchen landline, grateful for the privacy to speak freely about my situation. "Oh, honey," Nancy said after I explained what had happened at dinner. "I'm so sorry. I know how much you love those children, and I know how hard you've tried to make that living arrangement work." "I just don't understand it, Nancy," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been contributing money, helping with the boys, cooking and cleaning. I thought I was being helpful, but apparently I've been nothing but a burden this whole time." "Grace, listen to me," Nancy said firmly. "You are not a burden. You're a generous, loving woman who made sacrifices to help her family. If they can't appreciate that, it says everything about their character and nothing about your worth." We talked for over an hour about potential options. Nancy explained that her retirement community in Florida had a waiting list, but she could put in a good word with the management company. She also mentioned that the cost of living in Florida was significantly lower than Michigan, and my pension would stretch much further. "You could get a nice one-bedroom apartment here for about $1,200 a month," she said. "And there are senior centers, libraries, volunteer opportunities. You wouldn't be isolated like you might be in some places." The idea of starting over in Florida was both exciting and terrifying. I'd never lived anywhere but Michigan, and the thought of leaving Jake and Sam behind made my chest tight with anxiety. But I also couldn't deny the appeal of sunshine, lower costs, and a fresh start away from the painful memories of the past 2 years. Around 10:30, the phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number on the caller ID, but something made me pick it up on the 4th ring. "Hello, is this Mrs. Grace Mitchell?" asked a professional-sounding male voice. "Yes, this is Grace. Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Robert Hayes, and I'm an attorney here in Detroit. I've been trying to reach your family about your late husband Tom's estate. There's been a significant development regarding property he inherited from his uncle Frank. I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, confused and curious. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. Tom's estate was settled 2 years ago. We didn't have much beyond our house and some small savings accounts. Ma'am, I understand your confusion, but this concerns property that was held in a family trust that your husband may not have been aware of. Are you familiar with Tom's uncle, Frank Mitchell? I searched my memory. Tom had mentioned Uncle Frank occasionally, his father's older brother who had never married and had worked in real estate development in downtown Detroit back in the 1960s and 70s. Frank had died about 15 years ago, and I remembered Tom attending the funeral, but I didn't recall any inheritance or significant relationship between them. I remember Uncle Frank, but Tom never mentioned inheriting anything from him. Are you sure you have the right family? Mrs. Mitchell, I'm quite certain. Uncle Frank left property in a family trust that was managed by a law firm that has since merged with several other companies. The paperwork has been tied up in bureaucratic red tape for years, but we've recently completed a full audit of inherited properties that weren't properly transferred to beneficiaries. My heart started beating faster. What kind of property are we talking about? A commercial strip mall in downtown Detroit. Due to the recent urban redevelopment in that area, the property has been appraised at approximately $2.8 million. I almost dropped the phone. I'm sorry, could you repeat that number? $2.8 million, Mrs. Mitchell. As Tom's widow, you are the primary beneficiary of this trust. However, I should mention that someone from your family has been in contact with our office for several weeks, asking about the status of this inheritance. A cold chill ran down my spine as I remembered Lisa's mysterious phone calls and secretive behavior over the past few months. Someone from my family? Who exactly? A Mrs. Lisa Mitchell. She's been calling regularly, claiming to represent your interests and asking about expediting the transfer process. She seemed quite knowledgeable about the property and very eager to move forward with the paperwork. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Lisa had somehow discovered this inheritance and had been trying to figure out how to get her hands on it. Her sudden increase in hostility toward me, her determination to make me feel unwelcome, her insistence that I needed to leave, it all made sense now. Mr. Hayes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, what would Lisa need from me to complete this transfer? Only you can legally sign the documents transferring ownership, Mrs. Mitchell. The inheritance laws are very clear on this point. However, the beneficiary must appear in person with proper identification, and the signature must be witnessed and notarized by our office. And if I were to, hypothetically, sign something without fully understanding what it was, well, that would be highly irregular and potentially illegal. Any transfer documents would need to clearly state what property is being transferred and to whom. If someone were to mislead a beneficiary about the nature or value of what they were signing, that could constitute fraud. I felt like I was going to be sick. Lisa had been planning to trick me into signing away nearly $3 million. The phone conversation I'd overheard the night before suddenly made perfect sense. She can't know yet. Everything depends on getting this done before she finds out. The lawyer said we need her signature, but she has to sign willingly. Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something very important. Has Lisa Mitchell been trying to set up an appointment for me to come in and sign these documents? As a matter of fact, yes. She called just last week asking about scheduling an appointment for this week. She seemed very anxious to get everything finalized as quickly as possible. And you haven't told her that I called you today? No, ma'am. I haven't spoken to anyone else about this conversation. Client confidentiality is very important to our firm. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Mr. Hayes, I'd like to schedule a private consultation with you to discuss this inheritance and my legal rights. But I need you to promise me that you won't mention to anyone, especially Lisa Mitchell, that I've called. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Would this afternoon work for you? I have an opening at 2:00. That would be perfect. And Mr. Hayes, if Lisa calls to schedule anything for me, please tell her that you're still processing paperwork and aren't ready to meet yet. I understand completely, Mrs. Mitchell. I'll see you at 2:00. After I hung up the phone, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, trying to process what I'd just learned. Less than 12 hours ago, I had been devastated by Lisa's attack and ready to slink away with my tail between my legs. Now I understood that her cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated and greedy, designed to make me so miserable that I'd be grateful for any kindness she showed me. The phone conversation I'd overheard made sense now. Lisa had been planning to manipulate me into signing away my inheritance, probably by presenting it as some routine paperwork that needed my signature for insurance or tax purposes. She would have been sweet and accommodating, maybe even apologetic about our fight, and I would have signed whatever she put in front of me without question. But now I knew the truth, and I had a choice to make. I could confront Lisa and David immediately, creating a massive family explosion that would probably result in me being thrown out of the house within hours. Or I could play along with whatever plan she was hatching, gather more information, and figure out how to protect myself and my inheritance. As I sat there thinking about my options, I realized that for the first time in 2 years, I held all the power in this relationship. Lisa needed something from me, something worth nearly $3 million, and she had no idea that I knew about it. The woman who had called me dead weight less than 24 hours ago was about to discover that this particular piece of dead weight was worth more than she'd ever dreamed possible, and I was going to make sure she understood exactly what that meant. The meeting with the attorney would give me the information I needed to make my next move, but one thing was already crystal clear. Whatever happened next, I would never again allow anyone to make me feel worthless or unwanted. I had value, literally and figuratively, and it was time for my family to learn that lesson in the most unforgettable way possible. My afternoon meeting with attorney Robert Hayes confirmed my worst suspicions and gave me the ammunition I needed for what was about to become the most satisfying moment of my entire life. His downtown Detroit office was located in a gleaming high-rise building, and as I sat across from his mahogany desk reviewing the inheritance documents, I felt like I was in some kind of surreal dream. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Hayes explained, spreading out official-looking papers covered in legal terminology, your late husband's Uncle Frank was quite the shrewd businessman. This strip mall property has been generating rental income for over 40 years, and with the recent urban revitalization project, the city has expressed interest in purchasing it for commercial development. The property consisted of 8 retail units in downtown Detroit's emerging arts district, currently occupied by a coffee shop, a vintage bookstore, a yoga studio, and several other small businesses. The rental income alone was bringing in over $12,000 monthly, and the city's potential purchase offer could push the total value even higher. The most important thing you need to understand, Mr. Hayes continued, is that this inheritance is yours and yours alone. As Tom's widow, you are the sole beneficiary. No one else has any legal claim to this property or the income it generates. I asked him to explain exactly what Lisa had been telling his office during her multiple phone calls over the past several weeks. She initially called claiming to be your financial power of attorney, he said, consulting his notes. When we explained that we had no such documentation on file, she changed her story and said she was helping coordinate your affairs because you were, and I quote, elderly and confused about financial matters. The insult stung, but it also revealed just how calculated Lisa's manipulation had been. She had been setting the stage to present me as someone who wasn't competent to handle my own affairs. Most recently, Mr. Hayes continued, she's been insisting that you're eager to transfer the property to your son David for family estate planning purposes. She claimed you wanted to avoid taxes and ensure the property stayed in the family. I shook my head in amazement at Lisa's creativity and audacity. Mr. Hayes, I knew nothing about this property until you called me this morning. Lisa has never discussed estate planning with me, and I certainly never expressed any desire to transfer anything to David. I suspected as much, he said. Her eagerness to expedite the process raised red flags, especially when she asked if there was any way to complete the transfer without you coming to the office in person. We spent another hour going over my legal rights and options. I could keep the property and collect the rental income. I could sell it and take the cash. Or I could choose to gift some or all of it to family members if I wished. But the key point was that the choice was entirely mine to make. As I left Mr. Hayes's office with copies of all the documents safely tucked in my purse, I felt more empowered than I had in years. For the first time since Tom's death, I was in complete control of my own destiny, and I had the financial means to make whatever choices I wanted about my future. When I arrived back at David's house around 4 o'clock, Lisa was in the kitchen starting dinner preparations. She looked up when I entered, and I was struck by how different her demeanor was compared to the night before. Gone was the cold hostility, replaced by something that almost looked like nervousness. "Grace, hi," she said, with a brightness that seemed forced. "How was your day? I was hoping we could talk when you had a minute." "Of course," I replied, setting my purse on the counter and trying to keep my expression neutral. "What did you want to discuss?" "Well, first, I want to apologize for last night," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I was stressed about work and finances, and I took it out on you unfairly. You've been nothing but helpful since you moved in, and I shouldn't have said those things." The complete reversal was so obvious and manipulative that I almost laughed out loud. Less than 24 hours ago, I was dead weight that needed to be discarded. Now, suddenly, I was helpful and appreciated. "I appreciate the apology, Lisa," I said carefully. "Last night was very hurtful for everyone, especially the boys." "Yes, exactly," she said, seizing on my mention of Jake and Sam. "That's actually part of what I wanted to talk to you about. David and I stayed up late discussing everything, and we realized we overreacted. We don't want you to leave. This is your home, and we want you to stay." I had to admire her acting skills. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have been touched by this apparent change of heart. "That's very kind of you to say," I replied. "But I don't want to be somewhere I'm not truly wanted. Maybe it would be better for everyone if I found my own place." "No, Grace, please," Lisa said, and I could hear genuine panic creeping into her voice. "We were wrong. We want you here. In fact, there's something else I wanted to mention. I got a call today about some paperwork that needs your signature. Something to do with insurance policies from when Tom passed away." And there it was, the setup I'd been expecting. "Insurance paperwork?" I asked innocently. Yes, apparently there was some kind of processing error, and they need to update beneficiary information. It's just a formality, but it has to be done in person at an attorney's office. I thought we could go tomorrow afternoon, get it taken care of, and then maybe celebrate with a nice lunch afterwards. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her suggestion. That sounds reasonable. Do you have the details about where we need to go? Lisa's relief was palpable. Yes, I have all the information. It shouldn't take more than an hour or so, and then we can put all this bureaucratic nonsense behind us. When David came home from work that evening, the family dinner was a complete contrast to the night before. Lisa was chatty and attentive, asking about my day and making pleasant conversation with the boys. She served my favorite dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and made a point of thanking me for all the help I provided with homework and household tasks. Jake and Sam were visibly relieved by the change in atmosphere, and they excitedly told their father about their school projects and upcoming soccer games. David seemed tired but pleased that the family tension had apparently resolved itself. "Mom, I'm glad you're staying," he said, as Lisa was clearing the dinner dishes. "Last night got a little heated, but Lisa's right. We want you here. Your family." I smiled and nodded, playing my part perfectly while inside I was seething at how easily they thought they could manipulate me. The plan was clearly for Lisa to get my signature on the inheritance transfer documents, probably by telling me they were routine insurance forms, and then I'd be grateful for their sudden change of heart about wanting me to stay. That night, I lay in bed, going over my strategy for the next day's confrontation. I had several options for how to handle the situation, ranging from quietly declining to sign anything to creating a dramatic scene that would expose Lisa's deception in front of witnesses. But I wanted to see exactly how far she was willing to go with her lies before I revealed what I knew. The next morning, Lisa was practically glowing with anticipation. She suggested I wear something nice for our trip to the attorney's office, and she even offered to stop at the salon beforehand so I could get my hair done for our celebration lunch. "I'm just so relieved that we worked everything out," she said as we drove downtown. "Family is the most important thing, and I hate when there's conflict between people who love each other." I made appropriate responses to her chatter while privately marveling at her ability to lie so smoothly. When we arrived at Robert Hayes's office building, I could feel Lisa's excitement building as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist greeted us professionally and led us into Mr. Hayes's office, where he was waiting with a stack of documents on his desk. Lisa immediately launched into her prepared speech. "Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for accommodating us on such short notice. As I explained on the phone, Grace is eager to get this insurance paperwork finalized so we can move forward with our family planning." Mr. Hayes looked at Lisa with an expression that was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Lisa Mitchell, I presume?" "Yes, and this is Grace, Tom's widow. She's ready to sign whatever needs to be signed so we can get this bureaucratic nonsense behind us." I watched Lisa's performance with fascination. She was confident, authoritative, and completely convinced that she was in control of the situation. "Mrs. Grace Mitchell," Mr. Hayes said, turning his attention to me. "Before we proceed with any document signing, I need to explain exactly what these papers contain. This is not insurance paperwork. These are legal documents transferring ownership of commercial real estate valued at approximately $2.8 million. The color drained from Lisa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "Mrs. Lisa Mitchell, are you suggesting that you were not aware of the true nature of these documents?" Mr. Hayes asked with a raised eyebrow. I decided it was time to take control of the situation. "Lisa, I said calmly. I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's really happening here. Lisa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Grace, there must be some mistake. The person who called me said this was about insurance policies. No one called you, Lisa, I said, pulling the inheritance documents from my purse. You've been calling Mr. Hayes's office for weeks, trying to figure out how to get me to sign away my inheritance without realizing what I was signing. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. When did you, she stammered. I spoke with Mr. Hayes yesterday morning right after you left for work, I said. I know about Uncle Frank's property. I know about the $2.8 million inheritance, and I know that you've been planning to trick me into signing it away. Lisa's shock quickly transformed into desperate anger. Grace, you don't understand the financial pressure we're under. The credit card debt, the business loans, the mortgage payments, we're drowning. This money could save our family. By stealing it from me? I asked. By calling me dead weight and making me feel worthless so I'd be grateful when you suddenly started being nice to me again? We kept you from being homeless, Lisa shouted, her true nature emerging again. We fed you and housed you and gave you a place to belong. We deserve this money for everything we've sacrificed. I stood up from my chair and looked down at this woman who had made my life miserable for months while secretly plotting to rob me of millions of dollars. Lisa, I said with more strength in my voice than I'd felt in years, yesterday you told me I was nothing but dead weight that contributed nothing to your family. Today, you discover I'm worth $2.8 million, and suddenly I'm precious family that you can't live without. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. I turned to Mr. Hayes, who had been watching this drama unfold with professional interest. I will not be signing any transfer documents today. In fact, I've decided that I'll be moving out of my son's house within the next 2 weeks, and I'll be using my inheritance to start fresh somewhere that I'm valued for who I am, not what I'm worth. Lisa jumped up from her chair, panic overtaking her anger. Grace, please, you can't just leave. What about Jake and Sam? What about David? This will destroy our family. You destroyed this family the moment you decided my worth was measured in dollars instead of love, I replied. The only question now is what I choose to do with my inheritance. The room fell silent except for the sound of Lisa's ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Grace Mitchell, would you like to schedule another appointment to discuss your options regarding the property? Perhaps when you've had time to process today's revelations? Yes, Mr. Hayes. I think that would be wise, I said, gathering my purse and the inheritance documents. I have some serious decisions to make about my future. As we left the attorney's office, Lisa was completely silent, her dreams of easy money shattered beyond repair. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was excruciating, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. When we reached her car, she finally spoke. Grace, I know I handled this badly, but please don't punish David and the boys for my mistakes. They don't deserve to lose their grandmother over this. I looked at this woman who had spent months making me feel unwanted and worthless, who had plotted to steal my inheritance, and who was now begging me not to abandon the family she had tried to manipulate me into leaving. Lisa, I said, the boys will always be my grandsons, and I will always love them. But my relationship with this family will never be the same after what you've done. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had nothing to offer. Now you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." The drive home was silent, but I could feel the wheels turning in Lisa's head as she tried to figure out her next move. What she didn't realize was that I was several steps ahead of her, and I had already decided exactly how this story was going to end. The real question wasn't whether I would forgive her betrayal. It was whether I would choose mercy or justice when it came time to decide what happened to the family that had called me worthless just 24 hours before discovering I was worth nearly $3 million. The confrontation at the attorney's office changed everything, but the real decisions about my future and my family's future were still ahead of me. That evening, as I sat in my small bedroom surrounded by the same boxes and belongings that had made me feel so displaced just days before, I finally felt like I was in control of my own destiny for the first time in years. David came home from work to find Lisa in tears at the kitchen table, and I could hear their heated, whispered conversation through the thin walls. She was clearly trying to explain what had happened without admitting the full extent of her deception, but I could tell from David's raised voice that he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had attempted to do. Around 9 o'clock, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. "Mom, can we talk?" David's voice was quiet, almost childlike, reminding me of the little boy who used to come to my room when he'd had a nightmare or gotten in trouble at school. I opened the door to find my son looking older than his 38 years, his face drawn with exhaustion and what I recognized as shame. We sat together on the edge of my bed, the same way we used to when he was young and needed to have serious conversations about difficult topics. "Mom, I need you to know that I had no idea about any of this inheritance business," he began, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Lisa told me she'd found some old insurance paperwork that needed your signature, but she never mentioned anything about property or money or millions of dollars." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of deception, but I saw only genuine shock and regret. "Do you believe me?" he asked when I didn't respond immediately. "I want to believe you, David," I said honestly. "But I also need you to understand how betrayed I feel, not just by Lisa's scheme, but by the fact that you sat there last night and agreed when she called me dead weight. You told me this living arrangement wasn't working, and you didn't defend me when she was being cruel." David's shoulders sagged, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. "You're right, and I hate myself for that. I was stressed about money, tired from work, and I took the easy path instead of standing up for what was right. I let my wife attack my mother, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." We talked for over an hour about everything that had led to this moment, the financial pressures he'd been under, Lisa's growing resentment about having me in the house, and his own feelings of being caught between his wife and his mother. He admitted that he'd known Lisa was unhappy with our living situation, but he'd hoped it would improve over time. "I was a coward, Mom," he said finally. "When I should have been protecting you and making sure you felt welcome in our home, I was trying to keep the peace and avoid conflict. I failed as a son, and I failed as a man." His apology felt genuine. "But I also knew that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. David, I love you and I always will, but I can't pretend that what happened didn't hurt me deeply. Your family made me feel worthless and unwanted, and finding out about Lisa's scheme just makes it worse." "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. I had been thinking about that question all afternoon, weighing my options and considering what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. I could be vindictive and cut them off completely, taking my millions and starting over without any contact with my only child and grandchildren. I could be generous to a fault and pretend nothing had happened, giving them everything they wanted and hoping they'd learned their lesson. Or I could find a middle ground that protected my interests while still maintaining some family relationships. "I'm going to move out, David," I said. "I've already started looking at senior communities, and with this inheritance, I can afford to live anywhere I want. I need to be in a place where I'm valued and respected, not just tolerated." David nodded sadly. "I understand, and I think that's probably best for everyone. But Mom, please don't cut us out of your life completely. Jake and Sam love you so much, and they don't understand any of this adult drama." That was the heart of my dilemma. I adored my grandsons, and the thought of not being part of their daily lives was almost unbearable. But I also couldn't continue to expose myself to Lisa's manipulation and David's weakness. I needed to find a way to protect myself while still being present for the boys. Over the next 2 weeks, I made a series of decisions that would reshape all of our lives. First, I met again with Robert Hayes to discuss my legal options regarding the inheritance. We decided that I would keep ownership of the strip mall property, which would provide me with a steady monthly income of over $12,000 in addition to my pension. The combination would allow me to live very comfortably anywhere I chose. I also decided to sell the property to the City Development Project within the next year, which would give me a lump sum of nearly $3 million to invest for my future security. But before making that sale, I wanted to use some of the rental income to make a decision about my family that would surprise everyone. I found a beautiful senior living community about 40 minutes away from David's house, close enough to maintain relationships with Jake and Sam, but far enough to give me independence and space from Lisa's ongoing drama. The community had everything I could want: a library, fitness center, swimming pool, garden club, and volunteer opportunities with local schools. My monthly costs would be less than half of my new income, leaving me plenty of money for travel, hobbies, and helping others. But the most important decision I made was about David and Lisa's financial situation. After much consideration and several conversations with my sister Nancy, I decided to take an approach that would help my family while also teaching them some valuable lessons about respect and consequences. I arranged to pay off their mortgage completely, not as a gift to Lisa, but as a security measure for my grandsons. However, instead of signing the house over to David and Lisa, I put it into a trust fund for Jake and Sam's future. They could live in the house as long as they maintained it properly and stayed current on property taxes and insurance, but they couldn't sell it or take out loans against it. This decision accomplished several things. It ensured that my grandsons would always have a stable home. It removed the mortgage pressure that had been causing so much family stress, and it made it clear that my generosity was for the children's benefit, not a reward for Lisa's behavior. I also established education funds for both boys that would cover their college expenses and provide them with small inheritances when they turned 25. But I made it clear that this money was contingent on their maintaining good grades and staying out of serious trouble. When I announced these decisions to David and Lisa at a family meeting in their living room, their reactions were exactly what I expected. David was overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, finally understanding that his mother's love was unconditional even when his loyalty had been questionable. Lisa was clearly disappointed that she wouldn't have direct access to millions of dollars, but she couldn't complain about having her mortgage eliminated and her children's futures secured. "Grace, I don't know how to thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything that happened, you didn't have to help us at all." I'm not doing this for you, David, I said gently but firmly. I'm doing this for Jake and Sam, because they deserve stability and security. But I want to be very clear about something. This is the only financial help you'll ever receive from me. From now on, you and Lisa need to live within your means and handle your own financial problems. Lisa started to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. Lisa, I want you to understand that I know exactly who you are now. You showed me your true character when you thought I had nothing to offer. And then you tried to steal millions of dollars from me when you discovered I was worth something. I'm choosing to be generous because of my grandsons, not because I've forgiven or forgotten what you attempted to do. The boys, who had been playing in the backyard during our adult conversation, came running in as we were finishing up the details. When they learned that I was moving to a new place with a swimming pool and that they could visit every weekend, they were excited rather than sad. "Can we have sleepovers at your new house, Grandma Grace?" Sam asked, bouncing on his toes. "Absolutely," I told him. "And we can swim and play games, and I'll teach you how to bake cookies in my new kitchen." Jake, always the more thoughtful twin, looked at me seriously. "Are you moving because of the fighting at dinner that night?" I knelt down to his level and took his hands in mine. "Sweetie, sometimes grown-ups need their own space to be happy." "I'm not moving because I don't love you. I'm moving because I want to be the best grandmother I can be, and sometimes that means living in a place where I can be my happiest self." Moving day came 3 weeks later, and it felt like a celebration rather than a sad goodbye. My new apartment was bright and spacious, with large windows overlooking gardens and walking paths. I had my own kitchen where I could cook whatever I wanted, my own living room where I could arrange furniture exactly how I liked it, and my own schedule that didn't require me to tiptoe around anyone else's preferences. The boys helped me unpack boxes and arrange my books in the built-in shelves, chattering excitedly about all the activities we could do together. The community had a children's area with games and a playground, and they were already making plans for our weekend visits. That first night in my new home, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea, looking out at the well-maintained grounds and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just 1 month. I had gone from feeling like an unwanted burden to discovering I was worth nearly $3 million. I had learned painful truths about people I trusted, but I had also found the strength to stand up for myself and make decisions based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth as a person was never dependent on how others treated me or what I could provide for them. I was valuable because of who I was: a loving grandmother, a dedicated former teacher, a woman who had lived through loss and disappointment and still chose to lead with generosity rather than bitterness. 6 months later, my new life had settled into a wonderful routine. I volunteered 3 days a week at the local elementary school, helping children with reading difficulties using the same techniques I'd developed during my teaching career. I had joined the community garden club and discovered a talent for growing tomatoes that made me feel useful and accomplished. Jake and Sam visited every Saturday, and we had developed our own special traditions. Saturday mornings were for swimming and playing games. Saturday afternoons were for cooking projects and homework help, and Saturday evenings were for movies and popcorn. They loved having a grandmother who wasn't stressed about household chores or adult drama, and I loved being able to focus entirely on enjoying their company. David visited occasionally, and we were slowly rebuilding our relationship through family therapy sessions that helped us communicate more honestly about our expectations and boundaries. He was working hard to be a better husband and father, and he seemed genuinely committed to making sure his family never again took advantage of someone's generosity. Lisa and I maintained a polite but distant relationship. She was grateful for the financial help, but clearly resentful that she couldn't control or manipulate me anymore. The boys sometimes mentioned that she made comments about my fancy new lifestyle, but I didn't let her bitterness affect my happiness. I had learned that you can't change other people's character, but you can control how much access they have to your peace of mind. The biggest surprise came 8 months after I moved out, when Robert Hayes called with news that would add even more excitement to my new life. During the final processing of Uncle Frank's estate, they had discovered a second property, a beautiful lakefront cottage about 2 hours north of Detroit that had been rented out for decades, but was about to become vacant. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "this cottage comes with 3 bedrooms, a private dock, and 2 acres of wooded land. The previous tenants are moving out next month, and you'll need to decide whether you want to continue renting it out or use it yourself." I didn't hesitate for even a moment. "Mr. Hayes, I think my grandsons and I are going to need a summer retreat where we can make some magical memories together." That first summer at the lake cottage became the foundation for a new tradition that brought our family together in the best possible way. Jake and Sam spent 2 weeks with me every July, learning to fish, build campfires, and appreciate the simple pleasure of sitting on the dock watching the sunset. David and even Lisa joined us for a few weekend visits, and in that peaceful setting, we were able to enjoy each other's company without the tensions that had previously defined our relationships. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that being called dead weight by my daughter-in-law was actually one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to see the truth about my situation and gave me the motivation to stand up for myself in ways I never had before. If Lisa had continued to treat me with fake kindness while secretly plotting to steal my inheritance, I might never have discovered my own strength or worth. The experience taught me that sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most beautiful transformations. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them, but don't let their limitations define your worth. I learned that self-respect is something you give yourself, not something you earn from others, and that financial independence isn't just about money. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your own values rather than other people's approval. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over and create the life you deserve. At 67 years old, I discovered that I could be happy, independent, and valued for exactly who I am. I found a community of people who appreciate my contributions, family relationships that are based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and a sense of purpose that comes from helping others and living authentically. The woman who was once called dead weight is now living her best life, surrounded by people who value her wisdom, generosity, and friendship. And the best part, this is just the beginning of my new chapter. I have years ahead of me to travel, volunteer, spend time with my grandsons, and maybe even find new adventures I haven't imagined yet. Sometimes life's biggest betrayals turn out to be unexpected gifts that push you toward a better future than you ever thought possible. And sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up being the catalysts that help you discover just how strong and valuable you really are. As I always tell Jake and Sam now, never let anyone make you feel small, because you are worth more than you know, and that worth has nothing to do with what you own, and everything to do with who you choose to be.